Over the weekend, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin penned an open-ed letter saying he will vote against For the People Act. That's a sweeping election reform bill. Manchin pointed to the fact that zero Republicans have come out in support of the bill, writing, quote, "Partisan policymaking won't instill confidence in our democracy. It will destroy it." And here to break it all down for us is advocate and founder of the nonprofit Social Change, attorney Todd Belcor. Attorney Belcor, it is a pleasure to have you back on BNC Live, sir. Welcome back.
Good to be back. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So why does it seem that Senator Joe Manchin is the only one wielding his power in a split chamber?
Well, it's clear that Joe Manchin comes from a political family. We have to remember that he was once Secretary of State, the entity charged with executing elections. He was once governor, the very position where you actually determine who gets to vote for who, and now he's sitting as a state U.S. senator. And what that means, he is now tasked with protecting the vote to make sure that when states overreach, as they are now in places like Florida, Texas, and beyond, that people's right to vote is not impinged unnecessarily. And even in his own op-ed, he mentioned that these restrictions, whether it be purging voters, whether it be taking away polling sites, whether it be requiring more eligibility requirements in terms of identification, are all unnecessary. But despite that, he's turning his back on his basic constitutional duty to protect the vote. And there's reasons to be concerned about that, not only for our American politics, but also in terms of what it looks like for Biden's agenda. But it's also important to recognize that Senator Manchin didn't turn his back entirely on doing things to preserve and fight for voting rights. He did say he would vote in favor of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
I feel like I just heard two different things here. One, which was he's not turning his back on the constitutional duties of making sure folks can vote. But then on the other hand, I heard you say he's not willing to step up and put pen to paper to make sure that that actually happens. I mean, in your opinion, do you think he's putting too much confidence in the power of the hands of 10 Republicans by not passing bills on party lines alone? Because it's clear the GOP is not willing to play ball.
Well, it's important to take a step back and recognize he's talking about For the People Act, which is a sweeping reform which wouldn't just impact voting restrictions, but would do things about things like Citizens United to make it more difficult for companies to funnel unlimited funds into elections. And understanding that Senator Manchin, comes from a state where the coal industry controls politics. So understandably, he is now fighting on behalf of the coal industry's ability to determine political outcomes. But he is saying he's willing to do things to prevent further restricting access to the vote through a more tailored bill. But he does have outsized power. There's no question about it. And there is no question that there is no way to get these things done without getting his support. So I think the energy from the Biden administration should be spent on getting the John Lewis Voting Rights Act bill passed so we can do something to immediately address these restrictive bills. 14 states have submitted over 22 pieces of legislation to make it more difficult for people to vote. And the end result of that means fewer people will get a chance to participate in this democracy. And that's the exact purpose of our Congress, is to protect that democracy. And they're not doing that job. So I do understand the importance of it, addressing Citizens United. But until we can get enough support to do that, the energy should be spent on getting the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed.
But how can we do that, Attorney Belcor, when we don't have the numbers? I mean, he's already made it quite clear that he does not plan to pass any laws strictly on party lines. He's not interested in that. He's basically said that is against democracy. We keep on hearing that word. So how do we plan to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act on a federal level when 14 GOP states have already passed voting restriction laws? So in actuality, they don't even need to agree with other lawmakers to pass it on the federal level.
Well, there are more Republican senators who would support the more narrowly tailored bill. People like Senator Romney, people like Senator Murkowski have given inclinations that they would support something like this. And it is unfortunate, but I do think staying away from the kind of the third rail of the filibuster is something that's important to do until you have the numbers to ensure you can get your agenda passed. if you had completely demolished a filibuster now and you don't have enough support to get 51 votes on a regular basis, then all you're doing is unnecessarily subjecting yourself to a much more draconian approach to legislative affairs in future generations. So I think right now the measured approach is to recognize that there is there is bipartisan support for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, pass that, and continue to do what you can to build momentum and coalitions for this next wave of this voting cycle in 2022. And then as you shore up your numbers, then see what your options are. But this late in the game, to continue to push when it's this clear that it's impossible to really gain success, that just puts the entire democracy in peril unnecessarily.